We're met with an unusual start to the story on Voyager. Nobody's having a fight, nothing is going kaboom, and we're not even on the holodeck. The word of the day is mundane, as Chakotay and Janeway discuss efficiency reports and surveys of a science thingy. The science thingy isn't even worth diverting for, but she wants to send the Delta Flyer to take a look. Why sending a secondary vehicle would be faster than just going over there in Voyager, I'm not sure, but they're the astronauts, so we'll leave it to them. Organising an away mission flight apparently involves a lot of walking around with a computer tablet, perhaps because nobody can remember the Wi-Fi password. It gets passed between multiple people and eventually finds its way down to Deck 15. On the plus side, it's an excuse for a new set, and one that takes a distinctly utilitarian look, as we're on the least occupied deck. Batteries, generators, landing gear, and the warp core ejection ports. Were Voyager a living creature, Deck 15 would be its arsehole. How appropriate then that the guy stationed here, and to whom this tablet is being delivered, would act like a real piece of shit. He's responsible for power distribution from the looks of things, but sounds like he's spending most of his time ignoring that in favour of theoretical space bollocks, and is offended by the prospect of having to do some actual work. We'll be seeing this wanker later, I suspect. Low achievers may be a running theme, as another unknown member of the crew is in bed trying to catch up with the work she's been assigned and calling someone else for help. Tangentially, why do we have shared rooms on Voyager? The crew complement when we set out was already lower than the number of rooms according to schematics, and we've lost more people than we've gained. Anywho, overworked wants help, but it can't be done over the phone, and she can't be bothered to put on clothes and meet. On second thought, maybe the quantity of work she's been given isn't the problem. I guess we're doing an episode on the misfits, then. We're holding an efficiency meeting with Seven to see where each department can improve. She thinks engineering isn't using its people properly, and her example is the shitbag in charge of power from earlier. He's got a load of degrees, yet is assigned to manage energy distribution. B'Elanna says the reason is because he's an arsehole who ignores the work in favour of his hobby. Normally he'd have been transferred to a research position, but that's clearly not an option. He's not the only problem crew member. The doc score has been lowered by a hypochondriac who regularly wastes his time, and who turns out to be the guy receiving a call for help last night. Quite how Seven learned about his regular visits to sickbay without breaking into medical records or breaching doctor-patient confidentiality is another matter. Even Seven herself is not immune to inefficiency, as Astrometrics has been saddled with someone whose work needs to be monitored, the same person who was calling our hypochondriac last night. The meeting concludes and most people leave, but Janeway is thoughtful and discusses things with Chakotay. We have 3 crew members who are ill-adjusted to Starship life for a variety of reasons, and that bothers her. Chakotay suggests simply relieving them of their duties, but that doesn't sit right with Janeway either. They're her responsibility, so their failure is her failure. If only there was some kind of activity or bonding exercise that they could all go on together with her in order to sort it out. Some sort of short-away mission in the Delta Flyer, perhaps. Time for a briefing in Astrometrics. Janeway's running through the plan with incompetence, theory wanker, and sick note. It's all basic stuff and there shouldn't be any problems. I'm sure we all know what that means by now. After they've gone, Seven questions Janeway's reasoning for what she's doing. The mission would go far smoother if she took people who, weren't complete arse. Janeway explains that the mission itself isn't the point of their little jaunt, but rather attempting to salvage her failing crew. Whether the hot forge of this trip with their captain will turn them into tempered blades or just a pile of molten shite is another matter. Based on the quality of the metal she's working with, it'll be a difficult job. Theory Wanker is in the mess hall, and when the people we know try to offer him encouragement, he manages to outdick even Tom Paris. Sick Note tries to live up to his name, but the doc's having none of it. He's going on this bloody mission whether he likes it or not. Still, I'm sure it'll all go smoothly. Janeway said as much after all. We arrive at the science thingy and start looking around, Janeway constantly checking on Incompetence's work. Sick Note calls from the rear compartment to offer food, and Incompetence goes to help, after kissing Janeway's arse. The constant checking of her work is getting her down, and she tells Sick Note as much. If this is Janeway's idea to give her confidence, then she's doing the opposite. Attempts to strike up any sort of communication with Theory Wanker go just as poorly, and, after an argument in all but volume and realising that Janeway won't back down like the other people he browbeats, he joins his fellow misfits in the rear. Which is handy in a way, as it means it's 100% Janeway's responsibility when the Delta Flyer has a bit of an oopsie. Some shaking is joined by a bit of the ship being torn off and floating away. Come on, Catherine, you're letting the side down. Fucking up ships is Paris's job. Whatever happened, it's caused us to lose most of the juice that powers the warp engines. We can pootle along at sublight, but that's not going to get us to the rendezvous with Voyager anytime soon. The phone's still working at least, so we try and call Voyager. There's no response, so Janeway sticks it on repeat. Theory Wanker thinks he knows what happened. He says we were hit by a dark matter proto-comet. Okay, that phenomenon has never actually been seen before, and okay, he was the one who wrote the hypothesis about them, but he's definitely absolutely sure that he's right, and we need to shit out the rest of our warp juice or risk getting hit again. That'll mean we have no chance of getting the warp engines running again, and Janeway's not inclined to do so based purely on the word of a dickhead with a superiority complex. Incompetence surprises everybody, probably herself included, by suggesting we teleport the bit of hull we just lost aboard. We can check that for evidence to prove or disprove Theory Wanker's idea. She and Janeway go to check it out, and while there, Incompetence apologizes for not seeing whatever hit the Delta Flyer. Janeway points out that she checked the same readings and didn't see anything either, so it's hardly her fault, and grabbing this fragment to check it was a good idea. But Incompetence isn't listening. She knows that she's not up to the standards of everybody else on Voyager, and thinks she shouldn't even be here in the first place. We'll leave them to it and go to the cockpit. Theory Wanker is trying to fix things, while Sicknote runs a medical tricorder over himself. That's why he doesn't hear Theory Wanker telling him to cut the power. There's no injury, but it does cause them to argue over which one of them is the most pathetic loser. The way things are going, they'll have killed each other long before whatever fucked up the Delta Flyer comes back to finish the job. We're limping over to a gas giant to pick up some stuff that'll make our warp juice work again. Janeway and Incompetence have finished with the piece of hull plating that got torn off, but it's inconclusive. Theory Wanker is still convinced it's a dark matter proto-comet and wants to dump the rest of the warp juice, a suggestion that's met with Janeway telling him to bollocks. Some shaking suggests whatever caused damage the last time is due to repeat itself. Janeway ignores Theory Wanker some more and tries calling whatever's causing the shakes. Nothing happens, but she's still not ready to give up and instead farts out a firework, saying there's enough warp juice in that to attract this theoretical comet if it exists. Nothing happens with the firework either, but something does happen to the cockpit. They all hear a noise and, as it grows louder, track it down to Sicknote, who promptly disappears. Not for long, though, as he pops back again almost immediately. No harm done. Well, apart from the falling onto the floor and then the movement of something underneath his skin. We move him to the back of the ship to check him over. Janeway can't find anything with a tricorder, and we can't teleport it out either. At least Theory Wanker admits that this probably isn't one of his rocks, though Janeway suggests he may have been half right. If this is a dark matter creature, then that would explain why we can't see it on tricorders, apparently. Sicknote tells us what happened to him when he disappeared. Unfortunately, this amounts to being in the dark and feeling like there were things around him. Janeway sticks a force field over him just in case, and goes back to the cockpit with Theory Wanker. There's another not-quite argument, because whilst Theory Wanker may have backed down on the theory, he is still a wanker. Bugger all of that, though, because we're receiving a call. Except we're not, because it's the message that Janeway sent. Except maybe we are, because it's been altered slightly to carry the same flavour of wibbly that damaged the ship. Might whatever took Sicknote be trying to talk to us? If so, whatever's inside him wants to answer. Incompetence says Sicknote just sat up through the force field, and he's telling Janeway that whatever's inside him is doing the driving. Sounds like a good excuse for pooping, and Janeway's only too happy to oblige, grabbing one of the pet guns she's hidden all over the Delta Flyer. Whatever's in Sicknote doesn't care for this and leaves via a hole in the side of his neck. It lands on a console and starts connecting, with Janeway suspecting again that it may be trying to communicate. Theory Wanker's having none of that, and ignoring Janeway's order to stop, grabs another of her pet guns and fries it. Janeway's pissed at him, possibly because she wants Bagsy on shooting any new aliens, but the argument stops when Sicknote claims he heard the alien's thoughts. He says it was thinking "do not belong," which is just vague enough for Theory Wanker and Incompetence to argue over whether it meant them or us, respectively. Janeway thinks that might be why it was trying to access the computer, to try and alter the environment for itself. The theorizing is rendered irrelevant by another piece of the Delta Flyer declaring independence and leaving. We're just approaching that gas giant to get our warp juices working again, so hopefully we can leg it soon. Another piece of good news is that the experience seems to have cured Sick Note of his hypochondria. I guess worrying about the flu is rather put into context when you've just given birth to an alien spikeworm out of your neck-gina. No time for celebration though. We've entered the rings of that gas giant to start up our warp juice, but we're not alone. Janeway thinks it's more of our spikeworm friends, and as Theory Wanker fucked one of them up, they're probably not here for a polite chat over tea. Janeway tells the others to get in an escape pod and scarp her while she tries to take care of it, saying she might be able to disable the spikeworms by pooping yellow into the ring and setting off the stuff they're here to gather. I think the word disable is doing a lot of fucking work in that sentence, but we've already murdered one of the bastards, so what the hell? Incompetence declines, and so does Sick Note, leaving only Theory Wanker to take up the offer of scarpering. Janeway wishes him luck, and even manages to make it sound genuine. As the pod launches, it turns to head for the aliens. Is this a lesson from Janeway on what happens to people who disobey orders, perhaps? No, it's Theory Wanker choosing to make a brave sacrifice for the others, having had a complete about-face. Janeway orders him to stop, but we already know how much attention he pays to those. I suppose we'd best go and rescue him then. We fly over and teleport the whole thing aboard while continuing with the original poop plan, and fade to white as the shockwave hits. We awake in sickbay where Chakotay is hovering over Janeway. Whether he's showing concern or debating the chance of an extra pip becomes moot as she wakes up. The others are alive too, because of course they are, and Chakotay explains Voyager found them drifting above a gas giant. I guess we must have disabled the shit out of those other spikeworms, and we leave Janeway to contemplate having potentially started yet another war with a new alien species as we fly away. You could be forgiven for reaching the end of this and thinking you've seen it before. The plot premise is essentially unchanged from Learning Curve in Season 1. They were Marquee crew and these are Starfleet, but beyond that it's basically the same springboard. Except this one was less satisfying in my opinion. Marquee struggling to adapt to Starfleet rules makes sense, especially when you bring being stranded into the equation. Here, the premise raises questions. Why would these people even be on Voyager? If this was a standard ship performing routine work, I could understand it, but we need to remember that Voyager was tasked with tracking down a terrorist group in a highly secretive mission, travelling to a particularly dangerous area in a ship packed with bleeding-edge tech. The urgent nature of the mission gives us a reason to assign people straight from the Academy. They're available. If you need a crew quickly, you choose people who are already in the same system. But why would you assign the Dross and the Dregs to something so critical? Even if the crew assignment had been completed prior to Voyager being given an urgent mission, it's still one of the most advanced ships in the fleet, with a raft of new equipment and high capabilities. You don't put your mid-tier people on that, let alone the stragglers. Theory Wanker I can understand. 5 degrees looks great on paper. That's the same logic that got top of his class Harry Kimmer spot, despite him having about as much personality as a soup spoon. Incompetence says she got a lot of pity votes for the whole Bajoran conflict thing, and it being a PR coup for Starfleet. But instructors talk to each other even if they don't put it in official files, and faces from Bajor to show how the Federation has welcomed them would be better served on a high publicity but low risk assignment. This is entirely the opposite of that. Sick Note shouldn't even have got a look in, not without addressing the disorder and being given treatment. He's basically a shit version of the Murdoch Muppet, only Murdoch probably got a pass because he's an actual genius to offset it. Sticking him on a high-importance vessel doesn't make any sort of sense, even before you consider how someone with a neurosis about infections would react to the news that Voyager's computer systems are partly biological. And why did it take nearly 6 years for news to filter up that they're shit at their jobs? B'Elanna, the Doc, and Seven do not strike me as people who'll keep quiet about crew who regularly fuck up their day. Seven might get a pass on that based on the time frame, as she won't have put up with it for as long, but surely department performance reports are a semi-regular thing on a Starfleet ship, even before Seven ran her efficiency audit. Those aren't the only unsatisfying elements of the story. Janeway ends the episode with the belief that the mission has served its purpose, which is a pretty blasé attitude to take when one of her crew murdered a sentient entity. He disobeyed direct orders not once but twice, but we give him a pass because the second one was to sacrifice himself? Absolute nonsense. Incompetence hasn't improved by any metric at all. Her character arc was a flat line. She's the one who insists on staying at the end, but loyalty or bravery weren't her issues, just competence, and we end with her getting something wrong. Sick note's all better now, but we didn't have a damn thing to do with it. He was cured by Deus Ex Spikeworm rather than any interaction from Janeway or the others. It's all so directionless. Oh, and while I'm pouring scorn, someone fucked up on the LCARS interface in this episode not once, but twice, from the looks of things. None of those things are the fault of our cast, though, who all put in good work. The lion's share of the points from this one go to theory wanker actor Jay Underwood, who plays a convincingly supercilious piece of shit. In summary, an interesting premise, that of focusing on rank-and-file crew, largely wasted on plot threads that are completely devoid of satisfying conclusions. I don't regret having seen it, but if you skip this one on a rewatch, you won't really miss anything that matters. End of episode.
How many people do you think we should injure to make Paris look like a prospective donor to Janeway?
I don't know. She done a murder for 2 people before, but part of that was just getting rid of Tulvix. Let's be safe and say something like 5, yeah?
And you really think she'll go for harvesting Paris's organs?
Are you serious? She'll use the scalpel herself. I bet she'll even claim he volunteered and write it up as a noble sacrifice or some shite.
Wow, that's a bit fucked up.
Yeah, but look at it this way. He's spent years trying to put his genetic material in as many people as possible. We're just making his wish come true. Woof.